As the expression goes, a picture says 1,000 words. Think of the language of memes that we all use so easily to communicate with each other. Why tell someone what you think when you can just send them a picture? Take this painting, for instance. What is this image saying to you? If you were to make it into a meme, what would your caption be? We can interpret meaning through images almost instantly, but sometimes it takes a while to talk it all out, and even more time to plan an image that will say what we want. There are techniques that artists use to communicate those complex ideas to the viewer, and this is what a lot of our program is going to be about. Today, however, we're starting with the basics. In our video today, there's a lot of information, but once these ideas are in place, we can start to have some fun looking at and making meaning from art. Today we're looking at the building blocks of art, how an artist chooses to compose their artwork. For me, the idea of choosing is very important. It reminds us that artists are always trying to accomplish something with their work, whether to share a message, to make us think or feel something, or to make us understand something new about the world through their work. Today we'll cover two concepts. First, the elements and principles of design, or that shared language of art that I've talked about before. And second, visual literacy, which essentially means being able to read a visual image. Let's get started. To begin, every artwork can be described using the following elements: color and value, line, shape and form, texture, and space. These are the elements of design, the so-called building blocks of art. We could go on to break down these ideas even further, talking about things like warm and cool colors, real or illusions of texture and space, for example. But rather than go too deeply into these now, we can just let that vocabulary come out as we go. You can look at an artwork or any visual image or object, even things like your shoes or your couch, and point at these elements. The same goes for the principles of design, that is, the way the initial building blocks have been put together. These are ideas like balance, harmony and unity, rhythm and repetition, contrast, scale, and proportion. Just like the elements, these ideas can be further broken down into more specific terms. In some art classes, you may learn these lists and be able to point them out, but let's be honest, that is probably one of the least interesting ways to talk about art. For me, these things become more interesting when I think about the ways that an artist chose to put the pieces together and why they made those choices. As I said earlier, it's the choice that matters. Figuring out the choices and why the artist made them often helps us get further into a work. Now let's give it a try with a real work of art. This is one of the most popular paintings in the art gallery's collection. It is currently on display on the second floor, so if you visit the gallery, be sure to take a look. This is Alex Colville's Horse and Train. Now might be a good time to pause the video and talk as a group about what you see. This is a gloomy and dramatic painting. One of the interesting aspects of this artist's work is that in almost every painting he freezes an image just before something is about to happen, and it's usually something bad. When most people spend time with this painting, they really begin to feel the drama, that sense of approaching doom. Colville is a master at controlling the viewer's experience, and it is all about the choices he makes in his composition. He carefully plans out every aspect of his work. Before a final painting, there are many sketches where he tries out different arrangements of the important elements in order to find the most interesting and often most dramatic composition, and he uses all of the tricks at his disposal. Using this list of the elements of design, see if you can spot some of his choices. Basically, we're looking at a painting with 4 things in it. There's the horse, which takes up nearly half the painting, a railway track, a long black train, and a sign that faces away from us on the far left. When we think about real life, would you imagine the horse is large or small? What about the train? We assume the horse is large and that it is close to us based on the way the artist has painted it. As I pointed out a moment ago, it nearly fills half the painting. It appears close to us because its feet are near the bottom of the picture and its head near the top. I suspect that everyone will also say that the train is a very large, full-size train, even though it takes up only a small part of the painting. This is because our brains know that things that are further away from us look smaller. This is called perspective, and we use it to create an illusion of space. In this painting, Colville has hardly used any color. We see quite a range of dark grays, with a hint of color here and there, mostly in the gravel and in the grass. This sets the mood for the painting. Imagine how different your reaction would have been if this scene was on a lovely sunny afternoon. The sense of dread that we feel looking at it would have been far, far less. When you first looked at the painting, it is likely that you saw either the horse or the headlight of the train first. If you're willing, raise your hands for one or the other to get a sense of what your peers experienced. Did anyone in the room see anything else first? Colville's use of the elements will explain both experiences. If you saw the horse first, this is because it is the biggest thing in the painting, and because it is black. It takes up nearly half the painting, and it takes up a lot of the weight of the painting too. Our eyes are often drawn to the largest thing in a picture, perhaps because it is the thing that would be closest to us in real life. On the other hand, if you saw the train first, that is easy to explain as well. It is because the white headlight is the brightest part of the painting, sitting within a dark shape. Our eyes are often drawn to areas of high contrast. Colville really doesn't leave you much choice to look anywhere else. His use of line is also very clever. Some artists will use different kinds of lines to set the mood. Rough, sketchy lines for anger or excitement, smooth, straight lines for order and calm. For Colville, lines are a tool. He uses the line to connect the two main elements, the horse and the train. You can't see one without the other, and he wants to be certain that you know what happens next. When we talk about what this painting might mean, there are a few ideas that often come forward. We could talk about choice and intention. Essentially, can the train go anywhere but where the track leads? No. But what about the horse? As a living creature, it has that option. It could jump off the track at any moment, narrowly escaping certain death. It is interesting that the only place that color appears is on the areas that are away from that collision. There are all sorts of interpretations, including things like nature versus man, past versus present, progress and tradition. The outlook is bleak in any case, but Colville's composition certainly lends itself well to analyzing an artist's ability to both control our experience and to invite many interpretation, and very much this is directed by his use of the elements and principles of design. Next, I want to talk about something called visual literacy. Literacy is all about learning to understand and communicate with types of information that we encounter. Literacy is about learning to read and to communicate with words. Numeracy is about interpreting numbers. Basically, visual literacy is the ability to interpret and make meaning from information that is presented in visual form. Now, outside of an art class, why do you think this is important? This is a big question, and I'd like you to think about it. This might be a great time to pause the video and have a conversation about this as a group. The average person spends only 17 seconds looking at an artwork in a gallery, and even less time when we encounter images and visual information out in the world. Yet our brains process things very quickly. You are constantly seeing, interpreting, and sorting information, sometimes without even knowing it. When we talk about visual literacy, we can use a three-step process to learn to become more visually literate. First, we look and describe, then we analyze, and then we interpret. When I speak to people in a gallery, they often tell me they don't know anything about art, and so they won't be good at this. But as I said before, you have already got most of the skills. And if you can look at an artwork and have an opinion, or point out colors, shapes, or objects, then you're already halfway there. Let's give it a try. Our first step is description. Start by making a visual inventory of the contents of an image. Basically, list everything you see in the artwork without attaching any interpretation or explaining it. This is meant to ensure careful and thorough observation and to make sure that you see every detail. This is also one of the harder processes for some people because they always want to jump right to interpretation. It's important to slow down and take your time to look. Remember to also think about the elements and principles of design and the ways that an artist has chosen to use them. Again, this is more of a list without attaching an interpretation. Pause the video here to talk about what you see. As a class, try and notice as many details as possible. I won't go through the whole list that you could have observed by looking, but some of the highlights include a man and a woman standing on a bridge, the dog, the wagon with an empty sack, the basket of eggs, the clothing that they're wearing, the cows at the river or the woman hanging laundry, what each figure is doing with their hands. Definitely look at the hands. The light and airy colors, the dabs of paint, the placement and the size of the figures, and where they fit on the canvas. There is so much more to see in this painting, and often a tour of this painting alone can take 20 minutes or more. So my hope is that you'll keep going on looking for things even after I stop. Our next step is to analyze what you see. This is where we start to think about why the artist has made certain choices. At this point in a tour, I'd be asking you a lot of questions. Who do you think is the most important figure in the painting? When did this scene take place? Where are each of these two people going? And where are they coming from? What do you think they're talking about? In each case, we would also look for evidence in the painting to back up the answers. To provide you some background, this painting was created at the end of the 19th century, 1893 to be exact, so the figures are wearing clothes that would have been appropriate for that time. For us, this image is looking back in time, almost more than 100 years, but it would have been current for viewers then, as would the tasks that each figure was doing. We can guess, perhaps, that they have passed on their way to or from a market. The empty sack on the wagon, as compared to the full basket of eggs, is the proof of this. I would also guess that these two people know each other. Their conversation seems quite animated, and most importantly, look how close they're standing together. I have tried to imitate this pose with another person as a demonstration, and I can tell you that if you don't know someone well, it is uncomfortable to stand that close. People at the time would also have known more about the language of symbols. When an artist includes a certain object in a painting, these things can often have a double meaning. The two biggest symbols that stand out for me in this painting are the dog, which is a symbol of loyalty, and the basket full of eggs, which can suggest fertility. Images convey meaning through the way that they have been put together, through the objects, people, and symbols they contain, and through the things that an artist may include or leave out. Our third step is interpretation. Interpretation occurs when we bring together everything we've seen so far. Being visually literate, or speaking visual, means that you become aware of these factors and are able to challenge yourself to not only understand what you're seeing, but to ask yourself why you see it that way. So, what is this painting all about? From our previous observations, we see that the painting tells a story about two young people who pass on a bridge as they go about their daily life. They clearly know each other and share a casual conversation. Various interpretations can include things like, she is telling him that he needs to do something. After all, look at those hands. Or recounting something that has just happened to her. I would suggest that they think well of each other as well. She is nicely dressed, and if you follow his hands, you'll see that he has just dropped a lit cigarette on the ground behind him. Sometimes people think he's hiding it, while other people note that at the time that would have been just good manners. The weather is good, and the colors are light and airy. The artist has also linked the two figures with the landscape, suggesting that they are part of it, but also they have been linked together by the way he has used the same colors in small dabs of paint in every part of the painting. Their clothes, their skin, the sky, the bridge, and so on. Because I know a little bit more about the artist, I can also fill in a few more details. The artist has chosen the face of his wife, as well as his own face for the two figures, and the bridge where they stand is a real place in the French countryside. We know from his journals and letters that this is actually the bridge where they first met. So, while the actual encounter would have not looked like this, his choices have included some of that relationship and some of the feelings about that story in the image as well. So, why is visual literacy important? We are bombarded with visual information every second, and the media has become very clever at manipulating viewers through their choices. Those questions about what has been added or left out are essential parts of being an informed consumer and a critical thinker. Think about the news outlet that wants you to think of an event a certain way, or a marketing agency who really wants you to buy their product. They are going to do everything they can to sway your opinion, and often without you even noticing unless you learn to look very carefully and ask questions. I'm going to leave you now with 2 examples. We know that Napoleon crossed the Alps with an army in the spring of 1800. One of these 2 paintings was commissioned by Napoleon himself, while the other was an artist's own creation about 50 years later. Both paintings depict the same historical event, but in very different ways. Now, fast forward and substitute Napoleon for a photograph of a protest blockade or a political rally. When you think that through, the idea of bias and choices that an artist or a photographer might make, you'll begin to understand the power and the potential for abuse of a visual image. Once you've finished with this work today, what might be an interesting project is to start to spend some time looking at images that you find around yourself. Take a look through a fashion magazine, or the front page of the newspaper, or watch the news when they talk about current events, and think about things like perspective and angle and what information has been included and what has been left out. The more often that you can do this, the more you train yourself to be a very literate person when it comes to understanding visual images.